We are going to be talking about the fall of Jeb Bush and what went wrong in 2016 in the Republican primary for him to lose his political life. Now, if we go into Jeb Bush's $150 million failed investment into the Republican nomination and his investment into the Republican candidacy into the 2016 election, we will see a lot of things. Now, let's talk about this. Now, if we look at the 2016 primaries in general, we can see that we have Trump, Cruz, Rubio, John Kasich, and not not last but definitely least, you don't have anybody else on the list over here. All these four people won at least one state, whereas Jeb Bush did not win any at all, which is very pathetic. So he could not have done too well. Now, if we look at his credentials, we do have an important list of credentials from Jeb Elias Bush, John Elias Bush. He was born in 1953. At the time of the primary, he was 63. So that's a decent age to run for president. I think maybe he could have been a little younger, but whatever. He was 6'3", which is a good look for president. He was white. I don't know. Secretary of Commerce of Florida. He was the governor of Florida as well from 99 to 07. So right before the dot-com crash, he was governor right before the recession, so he didn't have to deal with any hardships too much. You can see him growing up with the Bushes. Now, pretty important that you notice that this guy grew up in wealth. Of course, he went to the Phillips Academy boarding school, so he just went straight up from there. He worked in a capital investment company in Venezuela, which is bad, and he was in a ton of lucrative bad optics stuff, of course, and he lobbied the Reagan administration. Yeah, whatever. Point is that he's been establishment forever. This is him with Reagan 35 years ago. So the point is that this guy's been connected. He has all the connections he needs to win, and he has all the credentials he needs to win. Now, his brother George W. Bush was governor of Texas, whereas he was governor of Florida, which is about the same thing in terms of presidential politics. Just that Florida is a swing state, so he'd do even better. Now, I think that he lost because he's a loser, but when we look at his record, he clearly could have done really well as a president. Now, if you look at how Jeb Bush beat Buddy McKay in 1998, you can see that in his very first big election, he was running as a consensus building pragmatist. Okay, he was never that rock rib of a conservative, as well as he won 61% of the Hispanic vote and 14% of the black vote, which is a lot better than what Trump did, McCain did, or Romney did, or Bush did, the other one. So clearly, he did a lot better than a lot of other politicians in Florida. So maybe he could have won the presidency, right? Or even the primary. And when you look over here, you can see that he balanced all the budgets. He improved the economy by a lot. He cut the budget by a ton. He did the right things. He ran the economy pretty well. The education policy he had did pretty good. He expanded healthcare without driving up the debt. And so basically what I'm saying is that he did pretty well. Now, if you look at his 2002 gubernatorial election, he did pretty well and won it massively, really. He also won the white female vote, which is a very purple type of vote. So he did pretty well. Now, when we look at the post-governorship of Bush, you ask me, maybe why didn't he run in 2012 if he had been out of the office of governor for 5 years before that? And you could argue that it's because we didn't want another Bush. So he waited his turn, and he waited until 2015 to officially run for 2016. Now, he went out of his way to go campaign for Ernie Fletcher. He went for Brian Sandoval, Lamar Alexander, David Jolly, etc. So many people, so that he could get his clout up with the Congress, just like how Richard Nixon did in the 60s, so that he could win the nomination in 1968. Incredibly important things. Now, he did have a lot of bad connections. Now, he joined the Tenet Healthcare Board of Directors, which is not a good look to join a board. He joined Lehman Brothers, again a private equity group, before the recession, so that he didn't know that the recession was going to happen. But yeah, terrible optics. You don't want to be associated with the Lehman Brothers. So yeah, and part of the earnings this company got was from the Obamacare subsidies as well. So clearly he's not too conservative or principled. Now, he's been rumored to run since 2014, and if you were to look at the RCP projections, he was leading the field just like how Joe Biden was in the beginning of the primary before the first vote happened. But when you were to ask him, if you were going to ask him a question, he would dodge it, and he would be very middling on everything, okay? Whether that be global warming, etc. Now, what Bush had going for him over Trump was that he was an opponent of same-sex marriage, and he disagreed with the Obergefell-Hodges court decision which legalized same-sex marriage, and he believes that businesses should have the right to discriminate against gays, which is good, and he supported lifting... Okay, so basically he was pretty good on things. He was tough on crime. He ran on a 10 to 20 life law, which is a mandatory minimum sentencing law, which is pretty good. So he lowered crime in Florida, as well as he was for saving Social Security, which is another good thing. And when you look at the Iraq War, now this is the troubling part of the neocon's resume. You can see over here that he supported the 2003 invasion of Iraq, which is no good at all. And when you look at the debt that his brother accrued, he justified them. He was pro-U.S. The Patriot Act and spying on citizens, which is bad. And he is very pro-Israel, which is vaguely popular, I guess, but not with the whole country necessarily, but more with the evangelical Republican Christian base. And he was married to a Mexican woman, which is not a good thing in terms of the primary, because there's some nativistic tendencies to the Republican Party. But clearly he did have a good mandate in terms of elections, other than 1994, which is weird that he lost. But other than that, when you look at how he did well with the blacks and the Hispanics, it is clear that he is doing pretty well for himself. When you look at the Republican Party presidential candidates, it was a pretty packed field. Now we have Donald Trump, who nobody thought that he was going to run seriously, so nobody saw that coming. We had John Kasich, who ran in the year 2000, but got completely ass-blasted. We had Ted Cruz, who was Tea Party and maybe too French to ever win the primary, is what Jeb Bush thought. So we have to keep this in mind. We have Marco Rubio, who Jeb could have easily have co-opted. We had Ben Carson, who is a token, and tokens don't do well in elections. Look at Jesse Jackson. Look at the black woman that ran in the 70s. I think Cherise something. You look at Herman Cain, etc. So the blacks in elections, other than Obama, who wasn't a token, tend to do bad. So he was a flash in a pan candidate, and I guess Bush thought, okay, this Ben Carson guy could be a good secretary or a cabinet position, so that's okay. We have Jim Gilmore, who's completely irrelevant. He was the governor of Virginia like 18 years before the primary. Like, who the hell told him to run? We have Chris Christie, who is just like a fatter version of like any given neoliberal governor. So nobody thought he was going to actually win post-2014 because he peaked in the early 2000s. And then when you look at Carly Fiorina, she's just a woman, whatever. No precedent for them to do well. And remember, he joined the primary before anybody else did. If you look at Jeb, he jumped in June 2015. If you look, Carly joined before, but most candidates joined later on. Rick Santorum, of course, he ran in 2012, did pretty good, but ironically he did exactly what Ted Cruz did, which was to get a substantial amount of the vote, but not enough to ever win in his lifetime. Rand Paul, again, libertarian, too fringe to really win the primary. And then when you look at Mike Huckabee, who the hell wants Mike Huckabee, right? So that's that. George Pataki, we're looking at the honorable mention psych. George Pataki, completely irrelevant. We look at Lindsey Graham, completely unlikable. Who the hell would vote for this guy? Bobby Jindal, too ugly, too brown to be president. I think that he was compensating by calling Trump a megalomaniac. He's just an optical guy. He does not look like an American president. He looks like a low-rent senator from Pakistan. Scott Walker, who, and I like Bobby Jindal actually, but he's just a poser. I don't know. Scott Walker, who was a pretty good choice. I think him being a governor of a blue state at the time, Wisconsin, was a pretty cool thing. Him fighting the unions could be a bad optics, but he was from the Rust Belt, so maybe he did have some appeal. Rick Perry, who, of course, was the governor of Texas pretty recently, as of 2016, and he had a really long track record, which was really good, and he did very well in the recession comparative to the whole country. So he would be a great candidate, in fact. If you were a little more coherent, he has the right look. Perhaps him being from Texas gives too much credence to the Bush dynasty thing, but, Jeb Bush is even worse. So of everybody that I would have to look at to be very important candidates, very clearly you could look at Rick Perry, who's a good candidate, Scott Walker, who's a good candidate, and you could look at other people that could theoretically blow up, which would be Ben Carson, Marco Rubio, Cruz, Kasich. But Trump, who would have known Trump would have won? Who the hell would have known? What a surprise. In fact, I was one of the only people who truly supported Donald since, I think, August of 2015. So I was there early on, okay? But if we look at the type of candidates that do tend to win the primary, we do have Mitt Romney, who was a moderate, and he won pretty big. If we look at who won in 2008, we see a moderate won pretty damn well. If we look at 2004, of course, his brother was the nominee, so that's pretty good for Jeb. If you look in 2000, you have his brother that won. Jeb's pretty similar to his brother, as well as you have John McCain, who's a moderate, that did pretty well. And you have a token, Alan Keyes, who, like Ben Carson, was from Maryland and got a niche of the vote, just like Ben Carson did. So things tend to go pretty moderate. You look at Bob Dole, again, another moderate. George H.W. Bush, another moderate. You look at, again, 1988, another moderate. Reagan, of course, another moderate. You look at Reagan again. Well, he was within the normal amount, okay? Gerald Ford, a moderate. You look at Richard Nixon, a moderate as well. So just keep going back and back and back. And you find that typically a person within the Overton window, pretty normal guy, tends to win the presidential primary for the Republicans, other than Barry Goldwater. And he didn't really win a big majority, and neither did he really do super well in the election, let me tell you that. When we look at the actual campaign itself, let's look at who ran it. We have Danny Diaz, David Kochel, John Downs, Tim Miller, Janan Grisham. Now, these are nobodies from what I can tell, but an important thing was that he was having his headquarters in Miami. He was having Hispanics on his team, so perhaps this was for the general. He even thought that he could win. Now, his slogan was all in for Jeb, which is really gay and not good at all. But when we look at the receipts of the amount of money he had $138 million already saved up pretty much by the time he started running to begin with. What do you think he only joined in June 2015, when in fact he was already exploring the campaign since December 16th of 2014? Okay, so in 6 months, he raised $100 million for himself. So he was starting off with a big war chest as well. Okay, he didn't have to be a billionaire. He already had the money. And when you look at the establishment, are you an establishment candidate? Well, look at who's running. We have the brother of a president and the son of a president, right? So, again, pretty crazy. Obviously, he had the chance to become a president. I think he didn't have too much hubris in himself because he was the governor of Florida, and he did well as the governor of Florida, so who would have known that he would have lost by such a big margin, right? That's the question for today. And if you look at the exploration of his candidacy, again, he said that while Mitt Romney was running, that he was not going to run, but he did know he was going to do it in 2016, just like how Hillary Clinton wasn't going to challenge Obama, but at the same time, she knew she was going to run in 2016, so it's pretty important what you need to do about that. Now, when we're starting off in this election, Megyn Kelly asked him about the authorization of the invasion of Iraq, and then Bush said, I would have done it, and so would have Hillary Clinton, and he's asked if it was a mistake. And then he said, in retrospect, the intelligence that everybody saw, that the world saw, was faulty. So clearly he was wishy-washy. And of course, you can't say the Iraq War was a terrible thing, because then there'd be like, well, your brother did that, so what the hell are you going to do? So again, not a strong position on Iraq. Just like how Mitt Romney, while criticizing Obamacare, they could have just said, dude, you did Romney Care in Massachusetts. And to that, he would have said, they're nothing, blah, because that's a weak criticism of the administration when you're doing the same thing yourself. And obviously, people do not think that Jeb is a good speaker, but at the same time, is Biden a good speaker? He won his election, so clearly name recognition and money can make you win an election easy, right? There was tension between Donald Trump, and while in the beginning, when Trump was small, that was a good thing maybe, but later on, when he was the front runner, why pick on Donald when he's probably going to be the nominee? And why even try to stop him anyway? That's kind of stupid. And when you look at his ad in August 2015, earlier on, Trump made an attack ad against Bush called Act of Love, and it basically had an interview from Bush before he ran for president, saying that illegal immigrants come from an act of love, which is a super gay thing. It's a super gay thing. And Trump said, that's a felony. And then Bush is supposed to be a compassionate conservative that is tough on crime. Well, if you're tough on crime, why do you think illegal immigrants come here from love? What, are you going to give amnesty? Of course. And then when we look at Please Clap, you can see what happened. In 2016, in New Hampshire, he asked people to clap for him after he did a lackluster applause line. And when he suspended his campaign, you could just tell that, it was totally appropriate. Now, in terms of the political positions, you could check this out yourself. I don't really care. But yes, now when we look at the money thing, now is money everything? Well, no. Bloomberg spent like $1 billion and he lost by a lot in the primary. If you look at how much money Jeb spent per vote in New Hampshire, you can look that he spent at approximately $2,800 per vote in New Hampshire. That's freaking insane. If you look at Donald Trump spent approximately $100 per vote. Isn't that crazy, guys? How much he spent on there. And you could still see more and more cringe with this guy. And there's nothing you can do to save it. And you cannot shut him up. He's just a cringe machine. And you can see George W. Bush dumping for Jeb, and that did not help at all. That was a desperate cry for help. And even though Bush had all these connections and an expansive family, his son was a politician, his brother was a politician, his dad was a politician. There were generations and generations of prosperity and wealth going back hundreds of years. Clearly, that was not enough because he was such an inadequate campaigner that he could not even summon the power to do well in a debate. So that's that. Now, if we look at the primaries, again, I implore you to tell you right now that Jeb did not perform up to expectations. That's just a fact. And what went wrong? Well, we already covered certain things. And what we covered was, in fact, that he was not adequately prepared. Now, he underestimated everybody in the field. He underestimated especially Donald John Trump, which is not a good thing. And if you look at how he's doing now, he's doing great as a president. Now, if you look at the polls from 2016, you could see that RCP 2016 election and Republican primary. Again, I'm going to show you how crazy this line does look. And when we load it up, while Trump ended up with 19 ahead of Cruz and then another 30 ahead of Kasich, you can look at Jeb Bush's green line. Jeb Bush started off at the head of a 10-person race. From May of 2015 onwards to about June or July, he was a front runner, in fact. He and Trump tied about 2 months into the campaign. And if you look, he never even surpassed Rubio after a given point. And when he dropped out, he was at 6%. Okay? So, again, being the governor of a big state doesn't help too much when you have a charismatic, nativistic businessman winning the election, okay? So, Jeb Bush completely floundered, and it's completely his own fault, by the way. And he just did not have the stamina, so to speak. So, of course, he lost bigly, kind of upsetting to see for the neocons in America. Jeb Bush ended up in a candidacy of 2,472 delegates with only 2. Okay, so clearly he did not even win a single state. You can look at his you can look at Jeb Bush's like 3 electoral votes from New Hampshire, which he only got 2 of. And you could just see all of the primaries. Jeb Bush is not even on the list because he just did that bad. And if you even look in the first 4 primary states, you can tell that not even a single county is colored with the Bush color. And look at all of the blue from Donald Trump. Of course, he did great. And Bush just totally flatlined in his career. And just to go into these 50-room town halls, which he considered good, clearly indicated that he was not given enough aptitude to become the president, and he did not have the energy, and he was unsteady as a leader, and clearly he could not get the job done, and he could not even last as long as plain white bread John Kasich. Okay? That is obviously clear. And while maybe some people may be mad at well, Trump is unoptical, and I wish we had a Bush in office. I wish we had Obama in office. It is just clear that Jeb is not qualified to be president, and that's why I don't think he'll run again, because he just completely underperformed, and that is too bad from him. That is too bad for him. Screw him. You can look at the primaries. Again, Jeb Bush got 3% in Iowa. He got 11% in New Hampshire, 8% in South Carolina. Gone. Dropped out like that. Now, this is the final part of the video today. It's going to be about if Jeb Bush, hypothetically, with the grace of God, let's say Donald Trump doesn't run in the primary, Jeb Bush is the nominee for president, and let's say that he picks John Kasich, another milquetoast conservative, or again, he's going to talk in the DNC for Biden, so I guess he's a liberal now. Anyway, he's a conservative. Versus Hillary Clinton and Martin O'Malley. I say that because I don't want Tim Kaine to make the Democrats win Virginia. So we're going to give the safe states away. You're obviously going to get those 3 states in the West to the Democrats. Illinois, of course. Maryland, D.C., Delaware, New Jersey, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Vermont, New York. Okay, so we have the Eastern Seaboard, New York, etc., etc. Now, let's look at the states that are safe for Bush and Kasich. And you would look, I'm going to give the 2nd district to Bush because he'd win it anyway, whatever. All the South, solid red, blood red, eyes are bloody red. Okay. Utah, Wyoming. Bush does great with the Mormons. Unlike Donald Trump, Evan McMullin does not run. Now, in this theory, I believe that Bush would get Texas safe. The neocons and the Romney-Clinton voters would not even exist as a thing that would be detrimental to the Republicans in 2016 or 20. From what I could tell, I would also assume that Georgia would be safe red or likely. Why? Because, again, a guy like Jeb Bush, even though he has the wrong opinions, is very good for the Georgians and the Southerners. South Carolina goes for Jeb Bush again. Now, Hillary Clinton, while she is doing better in the Rust Belt, and Martin O'Malley seems to be like a better candidate than Tim Kaine in terms of being less boring, I would think that Jeb Bush would have very, very, very limited appeal because the Democrats have taken 2 terms of the presidency. So I think he would win Iowa lean or tilt, and then we would look at Ohio. And since John Kasich is on the ticket, and I don't think that Trump's 8-point lead was all because of him, I think that the Republicans would have gotten a partisan bounce in Ohio, which would allow Jeb Bush to get Ohio lean. Okay, now when we look at the Hispanic vote, let's look at the demographic breakdown. He'll get about the same of the white vote, but would get more of the college-educated white vote and the suburban white vote, while not getting as much of the working class, uneducated working class white folk vote. So he would do worse in the Rust Belt, but do better in the Sun Belt if you've not seen the trend yet. So when I'm filling in this map, I have to make that painfully clear. I think that in this timeline, I think Bush would get 40% of the Hispanic vote, which is similar to what George W. Bush got in 2000. Now, the highest vote share for Hispanics for a Republican was in 2004, which was 44% for George W. Bush, but I think that Jeb Bush isn't as cool as George, so I'm going to give him a little bit less, which means that he would win Florida likely. I think it's his home state. He did well. He had a good reputation in Florida, as well as he would get the Marco Rubio endorsement. He could do a lot of things with Marco Rubio. In this case, Matt Gaetz would be co-opting the establishment, etc., meaning that Florida would be 6 to 7 points for Jeb Bush. When we look at the state of New Mexico, while he is getting more of the Hispanic vote, a lot more than Trump, I think that it would make it lean. And the Libertarian Party wouldn't be as strong, of course, so Gary Johnson either wouldn't run or would do a lot worse. In this case, he would get like half of the votes, just like how Jorgensen's going to do in this election in 2020. Now, if we look at the Scott Walker endorsement, will it really flip Wisconsin? I really don't think so. And in fact, I think that Scott Walker, since he lost the 2018 election, couldn't have not have been that good for Wisconsin. So that's a lean. I think he would lose Wisconsin by 2 to 3. Now, Minnesota, if you took, since Evan McMullin wouldn't run in this timeline, Donald Trump would have won the vote if you took the third parties out. So if you had a weakened Libertarian and no Evan McMullin vote, and assuming that that disproportionately goes to the Republicans, Donald Trump would have actually have won Minnesota by like 0.3%. Now, Jeb Bush does not have the working class appeal that Donald Trump does, or the Rust Belt appeal. And John Kasich does, but not really so. I think that he would lose it by like 3 to 5, actually. And then when you look at Michigan, there's more Democrats than Republicans, so you would really have to do amazing with the independents like Donald Trump did to even razor thin margins to get it out. So I think this will go lean for Hillary Clinton. So we're going this way. I think that Bush Jr. got it 3.5% in 2004, so I think that he would do about 4% to a deficit of Hillary in 2016. Now we look at the state of Colorado. Now, if he does better with Hispanics like Bush did, and he gets the suburbs, I do think that he would win Colorado tilt, and I would think that Hillary as well would pick up the state of these states are very particular. First things first is that we're going to give the Democrats one of the districts here. We're going to give the Republicans a slight win over here. And then I think that she would win the at-large district, basically, of Maine. When we look at the appeal of Jeb Bush in Maine, it's not that good. If we look at the appeal of Jeb Bush in New Hampshire, it's not as... that's a close one, damn it. I assume since he doesn't do good in the debates next to Hillary, he does mediocre at best. He's going to lose the state of New Hampshire slightly, and he's going to have more moderate appeal, so it'll be like the same as 2016, where Trump lost slightly. Now, if we look at this great state of North Carolina, I think he would do even better than Donald Trump. In fact, Jeb Bush would be perfect for this demographic, almost. So I think he would win by a likely margin. That would be likely like 7%. Now, if you look at the state of Nevada, it went 2% against Trump. So if he had done as good as Jeb Bush would do with the Hispanics, Jeb Bush would edge this out. And, turnout against Jeb Bush wouldn't be super high like they would be under Trump for the Democrats. So I think that he would tilt this one out. Now, he's really close to winning. Now it goes to the wire. Clinton would probably have won Pennsylvania by a lean margin because he has no in particular appeal to Pennsylvania. Now, if we look at the Virginia race, I do think that since Bush did win it both times in 2000 and 2004, and we do have a moderate optical Republican and a moderate VP, I do think that maybe they could edge it out slightly. And since Bush has a ton of connections and a lot of money, I think he could make it work. And then when you look at in the suburbs, Nova, extremely important, changing demographics, benefits Bush compared to Trump. So I think he would win it by the skin of his teeth. I think Romney lost it by 2%. So if he just improves on those margins, does a lot better with Hispanics, not that there are a lot, and if he does as good as he did with the blacks in Florida, as he does in Virginia, then I think he could win it slightly. Now, if we look at Clinton, Arizona is obviously going to go probably safe to likely for Bush. He's a great candidate for Arizona. He matches the Rhino moderate appeals of the likes of, let's say, McCain. And McCain would not go campaigning against Trump, like campaigning against Bush like he did for Trump. So that would mean that it would go probably 10% for Bush, 9%, something like that, but a safe margin nonetheless, if not a very good likely. As you can see, it's a very close election between these two. Very tough. But yeah, no, this is what would happen if we had a Jeb Bush candidacy. I was talking in this video about how it went wrong. Of course, he stumbled because of his lack of charisma. He was a Bush. He was pro-war, cringe, terrible at debates, petty, a fag. And he would have won the election against Hillary, but maybe or maybe not. It's a real toss-up, and it was a very close election. But anyways, thanks for watching if you've watched it all the way. Anyways, I'm gone.